Wow, it really is a full room. That's good, isn't it? It's a good start. I'm waving to people that I know, but I know all of you because you're feminists and you believe in the environment, people per planet, for everyone. That's why we're here, isn't it? Yeah. That's why Wen's here. That's why I'm here. Should introduce myself before I start doing the campaign. I'm Maria Adebowale-Schwarte, yes, Nigerian and German descendants, etc. And I'm very proud to be an environmentalist. My background's in human rights and environmental justice, but I also believe in conversations like this, where we use culture and art to talk about really serious projects like saving the planet. So I'm CEO at the Foundation for Future London, focusing on that very thing in East London. Right, some housekeeping. I think if possible, keep your masks on, but you know you, if they're not working, just try not to get too close to people, I guess. Housekeeping, I think you've all got the format for today and this conversation. I'm going to keep looking at these notes because there's quite a lot going on and I have to remember it all. I'd like to just say a little bit about why we're all here. And we're talking about the feminist Green New Deal. It's a collaboration, and I think that's how we work best, collaboratively, across cultures, across ideas, across projects. And this is a good part, an amazing piece of work by WEN and the Women's Environmental Network. I'm proud to be an ambassador of WEN, always have been, and I think they do amazing work, and they do it quietly, but firmly with ambition and impact. So if you can support them any way, please do that. Just by being here is one of those things. Right. So this is a collaborative project by WEN and the Women's Budget Group. Again, collaboration. And it started in 2020, so that's 2 years ago. Actually, probably in difficult times because we were just after, well, not just after COVID. Are we ever going to be after COVID? Despite that, the planet still exists and we have to still looking after it. The project is about building intersectionalist feminist Green New Deal. And I'm going to say that again, intersectional feminist Green New Deal. So it's a work going on in the UK. It's an engaging environmentalists, engaging in the story around environment. It's about women, it's about racial and social justice. And it's about organisations and policymakers, but it's also about asking and making sure that everyone knows knowledge equity is the most important thing. We don't need degrees, we don't need to be a doctor, we don't need to be a specialist in climate change. The knowledge is here, the knowledge is with the people we work with, love, and even sometimes don't love, but just a part of the earth. I'm not going to mention any names, but I'm sure you can. A few have kind of flashed through your brains, I'm sure. So the aim is to make sure that we support marginalised voices. And that doesn't mean by taking away their platform. It's about supporting, and supporting means opening up doors and keeping them open and not crumbs at the table. So that's quite a big ask, but it's an important one. And that's why it's still exciting. There's going to be a number of roundtable sessions with policymakers and organisations as part of this project, as well as with women from local communities and organisations across the UK. This input has been key to publishing 6 policy papers. Now, yeah, it's probably papers sometimes, and sometimes we might be looking at it through Google, but actually policy papers sound a bit dry, but they can make a massive difference. And this project is totally crucial for that. It's about revitalising local communities. That's people, place, planet, local economies, and transport. So whether we like writing policy papers or not, they are essential politically to make the change. When Climate Sisters project has evolved out of the Feminist Green New Deal project, and like me, everyone in this room and WEN are absolutely delighted that the climate change from Glasgow and from SWAN, Support Action for Women's Network in Greater Manchester, are here with us tonight. Now you can hear from my accent, I am a Northerner. I am from a place called Wakefield, which is getting quite a lot of notice these days, but let's not go there. It is a lovely place, having said that. So it's good to see you though here, south, north, east, west. It's a warm welcome to all of you, as I've said. And I also want to welcome to our online audience for people who couldn't be here in the room today to say hello and welcome. We'll be hearing more about Climate Sisters project shortly. And I hope you all have had a chance to look at the wonderful, and it is wonderful, Climate Sisters exhibition, either in person or online, because as I said, arts and culture tells a story, and this is another good way of doing it. You will find a postcard on your seat with a QR code for the agenda tonight, just in case you forget, speakers' bios, and a link to Climate Sisters exhibition, as well as the policy papers. So, you know, if you have time, please do look at that. So we're now going to see a short video about the Feminist Green Deal project before we give the floor to the Climate Sisters. And for anyone with children in the room, do not be embarrassed. They are part of the future. We want them here. They can speak too. Okay.
The Feminist Green New Deal is coming to the UK. Gender, racial and social equality needs to be at the heart of a Green New Deal to create a greener and fairer economy for all. Key to this Feminist Green New Deal are care, transport, green spaces and housing.
We need affordable and accessible healthcare, childcare, adult social care and public services, giving a better quality of life for all.
Green jobs are not just tech jobs. Care jobs are green jobs. Investing in care jobs will create nearly 3 times as many jobs as investing in construction.
Everyone's travel needs should be considered to create an affordable, sustainable, inclusive, and decarbonized public transport system.
Women take 1/3 more bus journeys than men.
We need government investment so that all properties can be retrofitted to address fuel poverty and reduce the carbon footprint to houses.
Radical transformation of the housing sector is needed if we are to properly address the dual crisis of climate and inequality.
More green space is needed in urban areas and must be protected, including food growing spaces, allotments, community food growing, wildlife spaces, and community orchards. Green spaces need to cater to the needs of all ages and must be inclusive.
Green spaces are vital to our physical and mental well-being and for improving air quality and biodiversity. Join us in creating a greener, safer and fairer world.
So you can see we're going to have a panel conversation, but before we do that, I'd just like to say thank you to the 2 sisters that have put that film together. I find that film has been a really important way of having a conversation around people and place. And, you know, not everyone wants to read a book or look at a policy paper or even sometimes vote, but a film like that can get someone thinking. So I'd like to thank the Climate Sisters for putting that together. And I'd now like to ask people to come to the floor, if that's okay. Oh, we've got 2 more, sorry. Getting a bit too excited about the panel. Right, so I'd like to welcome Zarina and Rose. That's right, yeah? Just making sure. Zarina and Rose. Talk about Climate Sisters.
And I'm Rose.
So we're here to talk about the kind. Who are the kind? Who are the Thorn kind sisters? So, hi everybody, I'm Serena.
And I'm Rose.
And we're here to talk about the Climate Sisters. So Rose, would you like to tell us a little bit about who the Thorn Climate Sisters are?
Well, the Son Climate Sisters are wonderful women who are present, some of whom are represented in this room. And do you want to give us a short
go for it.
And we came all the way from Oldham.
Well, hold it. We're the Glasgow Climate Sisters. Glasgow Climate Sisters, can we have a, whoa, come on, oh. And we came all the way from Glasgow. But we're not competitive, are we?
No, we are not.
Yeah. So that's part of our journey, really, is about how do we create sisterhood and not this world of competitiveness. And this is really where we think the essence of what we do as Climate Sisters is really important. So, Rose, do you want to tell us a little bit more about some of the things that you've been doing with the Son Climate Sisters?
So the Son Climate Sisters have been busy. First of all, we have learned so much since we did this project. Last year we were in Glasgow, and shortly before that we were involved in understanding our own responsibility and role towards the climate. And most of us are from the global south, which is we represent very marginalized communities. And we did a lot of things out of duvets. We did learn a lot about growing food and how we can get a voice. For me, I think Zarine, the best thing was giving us a voice. Each woman here had a voice to talk about issues that affect us.
Yeah, and I think that was the same with the Glasgow Climate Sisters. What that project really was about was how do we create a space and a space that values the voices of women that would not normally have their voices heard, but also in a way that honoured what they were interested in, where their heart lays, what they thought was interesting, and their climate issues that they wanted to talk about, not climate issues that were imposed upon them, but the ones that were at their heart. And each of the Climate Sisters from Glasgow are connected to different parts of the world. And they had stories to tell, but used creative methods, as you saw downstairs in the exhibition, to talk about their climate issue. And it goes back to what Maria was saying. Well, where do we hold knowledge? Who holds that knowledge? And whose knowledge do we value is really important. And that's why we created the Climate Sisters, to show and represent that.
Yeah, something else that came out of our project was Dorothy's duvet, which you will learn more about. But it helped us. The project helped us connect with very many young girls who became pregnant during the lockdown, between the ages of 11 and 22. And what that did is we're able to help them understand that just recycling this duvet can help them create sustainability where they are. So that just that link with us and the global south, I think we are all very proud of it, Zarine.
Yeah, and talking about that link between the global south, so we've also got the north-south link that we have had between Glasgow and Manchester was wonderful. So we really create this sisterhood that we really appreciate, I think, and we see it all the time now between the link between the Glasgow Climate Sisters and the Manchester Climate Sisters has worked really well. And that actually links us very nicely to our movie now. I don't know who's showing that, but yeah, so we have a short Climate Sisters movie for you to all see.
is Son's new venture. In the green world, an acre of land with an established orchard in Fellsworth. We are going to grow our own food to feed our families and the community in Oldham. This is Grassroots. Please join us.
Hi, so my name's Victoria from Northern Lily Community Interest Company, and I connect people to nature. So I'm working in collaboration with Support and Action for Women's Network, and we are teaching land-based training, so how to grow food, how to look after and maintain a 166 tree orchard, and how to develop a market garden, because a lot of the women, they actually experience food poverty. So for me, it's about how do we help people to learn how to grow their own fruit and vegetables and have access to land to do it, to be able to meet some of their own needs. And then there's the potential from people growing food and creating compost and doing the no-dig training to then going into horticulture as a career, or maybe other green careers across Greater Manchester. So for me, this is a real springboard to opportunity in all ways.
My name is Lillian. I work at SON, which is Support and Action for Women's Network. It's a charity in Oldham, and at the moment we're here with the women trying to grow things, see ourselves grow and rejuvenate, prune, and learn more about being in nature in the green space. At the moment we're using the No Green project, where we cut it down and put the soil on top to try and stop digging into the ground. And we're growing sweet corn, we've got rhubarb, we've got potatoes, and we're excited for the harvest season.
I have this on. I'm getting really used to them. That was amazing. Thank you for telling the story of other sisters. Really. Am I getting too close to this? Am I getting a bit of a feedback? Can you hear me properly? Just a bit closer. Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say further away. But okay, so I'd like to bring to the stage a number of speakers. Right, let's bring some people to having a conversation now. We've got two colleagues we've said already who I hope are tuned in. I hope I'm going to get fingers up and they're joined us. And also members of the panel in the room. So if you'd like to join me, let's start the conversation. Am I allowed to sit down or do I have to stand up? That's fine. I think we talk about equality. Okay. I'm presuming that this is on too and nothing else is required. Let me introduce everyone. You might have to just wave because we didn't have a chance to speak. I'm sorry, you did tell me speak to the microphone, Maria. Okay, Maria's doing that now. I'd like to introduce colleagues at the table, and a conversation that we're going to have. So we have Maeve Cohen. Yeah, just put your hand up. just to make sure everyone knows, Tiffany Lamb, okay, still speaking, transport expert. Emma Green, right behind us somewhere. Hi, Emma. And Dee Woods. Hello, Dee. Right. Let's just kick off with a small question. A really easy one, actually. What would feminist climate justice look like in everyday life? And from your perspectives, from your personal perspectives, knowledge equity, tell us a bit about your work and how that's leading the way to what you want to see for the future. I'm looking to you, so if that's okay, can you start?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's absolutely, yeah, it's amazing to be in a room with a load of people. Me and Kate were just saying the last event that I spoke in person at was a WEN event and a Women's Budget Group event talking about a feminist Green New Deal. So, yeah, I write and think about feminist Green New Deals basically, and Kate asked me to just give a bit of an overview of what we mean by a feminist Green New Deal, and I'm just, my notes are on my phone. I'm not checking my messages, so please, yeah, forgive me for looking at it. Yeah, so we're back at the start of 2020, pre-pandemic, if you can remember such a time. My colleague Cheryl and I wrote this paper for WEN and the Women's Budget Group called Towards a Feminist Green New Deal, and basically what we did was we looked at the proposals for a Green New Deal in the UK, and then yeah, applied a gendered lens to see how they were doing. And basically what we came up with was there was these two pillars of the Green New Deal, which was social justice and decarbonisation. And the way that they spoke about social justice and decarbonisation was to be done with these high polluting industries, transport, housing, energy. And the social justice element was job creation, so people would have jobs. And obviously from a feminist perspective, we thought that that wasn't really good enough, because if you're decarbonising these industries, housing, energy and transport, if you're investing in them to decarbonise them, these are all heavily male-dominated industries. So investing in these industries is going to do very little to address the gender employment gap. And then on the social justice end of things, if the way that we're going to achieve social justice is through investing in these male-dominated industries, that obviously fell very short for us. Obviously, social justice is a lot bigger than employment in the first place. And if your way to solve the problems of social inequality is to invest in male-dominated industries, we thought that wasn't really good enough. So we came up with some recommendations, and the main point that we were making is basically, I like it said in the video, care jobs are green jobs. When we want to create a green feminist future, we need to think bigger than the economic system that we're currently living in. And it's not enough to just decarbonise high polluting industries. We need to recognise the value of the caring work that we all depend on, that's fundamental to our lives and to nurturing the planet. And these jobs are low carbon. They're in every single city, in every single village, all across the country, all across the world. And they're essential. For these low carbon, labour intensive jobs are the jobs of the future. They're the jobs of a green economy. They're the jobs that are looking after the planet. They're the jobs that are going to address the other issues of social inequality beyond employment. And these jobs are mainly done by women. They're mainly done by people of colour. They're mainly done by other marginalised groups. And they're depended upon by women, by marginalised groups, by people of colour. Yeah, so that was sort of it was bigger than that, but that was one of the main takeaways of the paper that we wrote. And that's basically,
thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to come back and ask questions, so everyone's going to need to answer a few more questions about the project and how well they're doing. I'm turning to Tiffany Lamb. Transport, male occupied. What is your thoughts? Tell us a little bit more about your work and what you've been doing as a sister looking at feminism and the planet.
Sure. So I think the first thing I want to start with is just the fact that in the UK, transport is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. It accounts for over a third of total emissions, and 91% of that is from road transport, mainly cars and taxis. followed by lorries and vans. So we really need to decarbonize transport, but we have to do it in a way that's inclusive and just. So it's not shaming people for driving without giving them like feasible, sustainable, and active travel alternatives. It's really looking into how we can enable more people to get around by foot, cycle, or public transport. And really, for me, that's about democratizing the right to safe mobility and ensuring that all people can move around freely, safely, and comfortably. And from a gender perspective, that crucially means tackling gender-based violence as it manifests in our public spaces and on public transport systems, because street harassment is an everyday experience for women, girls, and LGBTQ people. And that affects how we feel when we move about the city or just go about our daily business. And it can mean getting off at an earlier bus stop that's farther from your home, or walking with your keys or your phone in your hand at night, just in case you need to stab someone or call someone in case someone comes up to you, harasses you, and makes you feel unsafe. And when we think about cycling, we know from the evidence that, well, from the bits of evidence out there, because there needs to be more research into this, but women who cycle are almost twice as likely to get closely passed by drivers than men who cycle. So patriarchal gender-based violence manifests again on the road, and this can be compounded by street harassment, verbal abuse. So democratizing the right to safe urban mobility, or safe mobility more generally, and decarbonizing transport are really thinking about how we can enable more vulnerable people to get around safely, affordably, and comfortably.
Thank you. It's not really a lot to ask for, is it? You'd think we would have got there by 2022, but anyway. I'm going to go to my colleagues to the back of me. Well, yeah, there they go. And then I'm going to come back to you. Just while it's working, actually, because I've been at these gigs and sometimes they don't. So Dee and Emma. Dee, would you like to just tell us in 5 minutes sort of what your work's about and why you're doing it and the impact it's making?
Hi everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there in person because currently I'm in Rome at the FAO negotiating voluntary guidelines on gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment in the context of food security and nutrition. So my work is about building equity into our food systems. And food systems and food are a big part of the climate and gender nexus, as I would call it. So women are the large majority of people in our food systems, both in agriculture, fisheries, as primary producers, but also as secondary producers in the home, in hospitality, and a lot of our work goes unrecognized or is not valued. And in fact, almost 74% of our food is produced by women globally, and mainly women from the majority world. So, and these are women being most impacted by climate change. So building in policies that supports women, in all their diversities, because it isn't just about the binary men and women, it's about, you know, all genders, and some same topics that, you know, have been touched upon. So gender-based violence, particularly sexual violence, which a lot of agricultural workers are exposed to, especially if they're migrant workers. And there's so many issues because of climate impacts that women are exposed to. The other thing is household food insecurity. We produce more than enough food in this world to feed everyone, yet in people most impacted by food insecurity are women and women primary producers. So how do we change that? And right now we're in the midst of a global food crisis. It's a combination of the pandemic, the occupation of Ukraine, and ongoing volatility in the markets, finance, and energy sectors. So policy takes a long time, but I think for me it is always about the collective local action. I'm also the co-founder of Granville Community Kitchen, where we're modeling and creating change from the ground up with ordinary people, ordinary women who come with so much knowledge, experience, enthusiasm, and we radically imagine the food system that we want to be in, and we're creating that. And that's a world where everyone can access good food, and by good food I mean sustainable, healthy and nutritious, culturally significant, and where workers and farmers are valued.
Thank you, Dee. We're going to have a bigger conversation about that. So I'd like to ask Emma Green, to just tell us a little bit more about your work and what's happening in regards to feminism and environment.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the chance to speak. So I'm Disability Equality Forum, so here representing the disability perspective. Some of you might have seen the Guardian piece earlier this month on how disabled people are being systemically ignored by governments when it comes to climate change, and I generally find there's pretty poor understanding in the broader movement as well, so I always appreciate the chance to speak. I know we're here today to talk about what the feminist, socially just future should look like, but there's such a poor understanding. I thought I should probably start with the problems at first. So yeah, as with all women who belong to a disadvantaged group, disabled women and girls face double discrimination. We're at higher risk of violence, sexual abuse and mistreatment. We experience high unemployment, earn less, and globally access to education is terrible. And climate change as a multiplier of injustices is and will be worsening all this. Lack of information, accessible information, along with lack of education, means that many disabled women aren't given the resources to understand the crisis. Unemployment and high levels of poverty mean that many don't have the resources to stay safe from disasters and climate conflicts, or take part in climate action. Being excluded from these conversations is a big problem because climate plans that don't consider our needs make new barriers for us. So I always talk about the plastic straw ban here, which I know in some circles they talk about as, oh, this big win. But really it only lowered ocean waste by about 0.02%, plastic ocean waste. But plastic straws were a medical device before they were started to be used by non-disabled people. So really the oceans are continuing to choke in plastic, whilst people who need them to be able to drink safely have had a new barrier created for them. I don't want you to go away from this thinking that disabled women are victims here, though. We have the skills, knowledge and leadership needed in this time of change. I always tell the story here of a disabled woman that you might have heard of. So she is a young woman. She was really worried about climate change, so much that she started walking out of school and sitting in front of her parliament. And within a year, millions of children had joined her, and she'd been nominated for the Nobel Peace Award because, of course, that person is Greta Thunberg, who's an autistic woman. To be disabled is to live in an unwelcoming and uncertain world made to exclude you. You have to become an expert at adapting and creative problem solving. And now our society is faced with adapting to increasingly unwelcome and uncertain climate. Disabled people, in particular disabled women, have much of the wisdom that's needed. We've been drawing on that wisdom in Bristol, where I led on the co-production of the Bristol Disability Equality Forum's Community Climate Action Plan as part of the Bristol Green Capital Partnership's broader project working with 6 disadvantaged communities in the city. And to our knowledge, as far as we can find out, it's the world's first plan of this sort made by disabled people. The plan is our vision of what Bristol's 2030 net zero transition needs to look like for disabled people. So yeah, welcome to Bristol 2030. We've succeeded. This bright future is lacking in things like jetpacks, but it does have well-kept wide pavements so that those who can walk or roll are able to do so instead of driving. There are good cheap buses with spaces for 2 wheelchairs so that wheelchair user couples or friends can go out together. Bus staff are trained to treat disabled people with respect instead of doing things like not stopping for disabled passengers or refusing to put down ramps, which I've heard so many stories of people really getting hurt by this. Bristol 2030 has good public toilets. So that people don't have to drive out of fear of having to rush home quickly is, of course, an issue that's really important for many women in particular. And those who have to drive because of their impairments can do so without being shamed or given access to electric vehicles. There are accessible plots at every allotment so that disabled people can be creating their own food. And there's a healthy, affordable food that can be accessed by everyone in accessible packaging. And when there isn't accessible packaging available, then people aren't punished for having to use the resources that they have to. New jobs to tackle climate change are accessible to disabled women, and this makes unemployment, it tackles it. So these are a few of our asks to the city. They're all simple, but will make a big difference. And if you have time, please go to our website and download the plan for the full list, because I think they're really useful examples of things that we need to see all across the UK. We're also running projects as the forum to bring that Imagine Bristol closer. So we're hiring disabled champions who will work to make sustainable transport and energy accessible and do things like basic fixes to homes so that they save on energy. We're also starting a repair hub to save mobility from the tip where most NHS items end up and fix them and sell them on affordable prices. These projects will save on energy and waste and support disabled people in poverty. So we've taken the first steps in Bristol, but this journey needs to start everywhere. So please work with disabled women, whatever climate work you are doing. To quote A.H. there's so much that able-bodied people could learn from the wisdom that comes with disability, but space needs to be made, hands need to be reached out, people need to be lifted up. Thank you.
Right. Last but not least, Olivia, Sweeney, tell us intersectional feminism and also youth perspective.
Thank you. So I was part of a project called Black and Green Ambassadors, and that's kind of the focus that I bring. So as it kind of says on the tin, black and green, we explicitly explored the intersection of climate and racial justice, which a lot of speakers today have touched upon. So the tagline of Black and Green is leading, connecting and celebrating diverse community action. And a lot of the work we do is just around that recognition and value piece of the traditions and the cultures around the world that my parents and my grandparents practiced that have always been sustainable or regenerative or all these fancy words that we like to use nowadays. But because of the colonial imperialist way which the West has changed the direction of the world in a lot of ways, they haven't been valued as such. And all of a sudden they've been rediscovered in the last 50 years. And this is what's going to save the planet. And a lot of our work is around just that value and recognition that people of the global majority of the global South have been at the forefront of caring for nature. always have been, always will be. So there's a lot of power that comes with that recognition and that understanding. So that's a aspect of the work that I do. One of the ways we did that is having a 2-hour radio show on a local radio station called Ujima, which is a Black-led organisation for the Caribbean community, and just talking from a really personal perspective about what this means to us and what this manifests as in our day-to-day life. And also exploring those bigger questions. That link between the local and the global is always so important, especially when for a lot of communities of colour in the UK, that global aspect is a lot more immediate for us. And then, as the tagline kind of said, that leading piece as well is really important. I think one day I'd love to live in a little bit more of a socialist or a society that might not have strict patriarchies and hierarchies like it does now. But in the meantime, we have to deal with the system we've got, and we need leaders. And those leaders shouldn't necessarily look like the leaders we have today. So it's around, we were given access to spaces that a young woman of mixed heritage might not normally be able to sit with real power at. And using that to change the minds of people who do hold power, to hopefully open their eyes a little bit, to show other communities that there is a space for them in that. And hopefully we are doing some of the work, so when that door is open to many more people of diversity, it's a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more friendly and a little bit more accessible than it is. I don't know everything about every intersection. I have a lot of privileges in a lot of ways, and I'm very aware of that. So part of the work that we're doing is around creating a leadership structure in Bristol and hopefully beyond that is diverse. So I don't have to feel like I have to hold all the knowledge of diversity and what that means. So it's around creating some sort of sociocratic power structure that's going to be way better than the one we have now. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And when I had the question of what would my feminist, socially just, climate just future look like, I think it's just a little bit better. I said this, a little bit easier. It's hard to put it into words. And I think the most important thing is around that feeling of belonging that very few people, I think, truly have. That is powerful. How can you care for a place unless you feel like you have a stake in it? And that sense of power and agency over oneself and one's own life. And this need for, I think, nature and care to be much more part of everyday life, as opposed to something that we have to seek out as a separate aspect of what it is. So I think those would be some of the themes that, when we change the world, are going to be really important to me. So I think that's me in a nutshell.
Right. So it's thank you. It's time for a conversation, isn't it? Because when we say all these things, it sounds wonderful. And we've probably all tried it and gone there and had conversations with people and wept, I have, about the frustration of trying to get the climate justice agenda up there with real decisions being made. Now, I'm old, you can see that, and it's kind of, I'm in my 50s, and the good thing about being here today is all of you are still here and still going. So everyone that's in here has got questions for each other, but we're here on the panel and colleagues. So I think let's just open it up to a wider conversation and questions about some of the things that we've said. Most of it actually is depressing in many ways. But having said that, when you think about how you make real changes in the world, it starts with depression and then it moves on with building the system and a change system, which is probably why we're still here, why we're all here today, not in girdles and ridiculous outfits that men made us wear. So let's have a question then, if that's okay. Don't be shy. There is, I think, is there a walking mic? There is. Thank you. Come on, there's a question. Okay, I can see one, I can see two. So do you want to, and let's be brief so everyone gets a chance, tell everyone your name. I know you've just been on the stage, and then just ask the question and the panel will try and answer, and also look through everyone else, see if they have any answers.
Okay. Hi, so I'm Sweeney. I've actually got a question for Dee. Hi, Dee. Nice to see you again. But we talk about food justice. Food justice is something that I'm really, really passionate about. And food justice, I think, is, again, like Dee, it's like at the heart of a lot of inequalities in this world. But one of the issues that we have in the UK is about access to land. So how are we going to change this issue about access to land? And it goes back to what, sorry, I've forgotten your name. Olivia was saying about belonging. When you're a person of colour, you really still don't feel as if you belong in this country. So how do we feel as if we have the right to land in this country?
Okay, I think that's a really good one, actually. Land, because it's also about classes as well as gender, how you identify yourself. So I'm going to take two questions at the same time, I think, and then we'll come back to the answers if we have them. There was someone else in the back.
Hi, my name is Shavari. I just had a question for Olivia. So you mentioned that like we shouldn't have this thing where we should be like caring for nature as like a separate thing. But are there things that we can do, like examples of like everyday things that we can do to like start now? So I think it's like quite important on a local level to just start as women here.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So how do we get a bit of land, please? You know, that's one question. And the second one is, can we just keep it simple? Because actually sometimes it can be quite complex for people with limited resources. We can be a bit preachy, not necessarily us, but you know, sometimes I do get upset by the environmental movement on occasion because we can get a bit preachy and we forget these social economic conversations we've just been talking about. So, Dee,
Right.
how do we do that? Let's start with that question.
Access to land for food production here in the UK and globally is a major issue. But bringing it back to the UK, we have this historical accumulation of land as private property, known as the enclosures. We previously had the commons, and then that was exported as sort of empire and colonialism. So for a lot of people, like myself, born here, Caribbean heritage, you know, we struggle with belonging and belonging to the land. For me, it is personal, and I have a spiritual belonging to land. As a Yoruba priest, in my belief that, you know, the land is my mother, the earth is my mother, and I have a responsibility as a land elder to steward it. So it doesn't matter where I go in the world, I belong. But to access land right now, we are working with local authorities, with city authorities to try and open up public land for local communities and new entrants to farming to be able to grow food or to farm. The other part of trying to access land is approaching landowners and asking them to give up land, and particularly as reparations. So I'm part of the collective Lion Land in Our Names, and it seems only right that, you know, land should be given to people who were disconnected and removed from their land. And for me, you know, doing that is also a part of healing. So it's not just about us having land or money. It is an important part of our healing. But speak to your local authority. All right, that's step one, to speak to landowners and farmers. There are so many farmers right now who want to support young people and communities accessing land.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a lot of questions and a lot of organisations trying to open up space for communities. I know that's one of the things I'm trying to do. When we talk about land and we talked about growing food on land and hopefully living there comfortably, but I'm also thinking about land which has a transport system that works, environmentally friendly and works for women and anyone that identifies as a woman. So could you just tell us a little bit more about your thinking on that question?
Yeah, so I think just touching on some of the issues mentioned around ownership and sense of belonging, I think one way that we can really revolutionize public transport in this country is by bringing more buses into public ownership and bringing the whole rail network into public ownership. The government announced a transition to Great British Railways that's essentially the same privatization. It's going to be based on which routes are the most profitable for companies, not which routes serve people to make the various journeys they make, not just the commute to and from work, but going to visit family and friends, caring journeys, shopping journeys, leisure journeys. And we really need to think about not just whether there's public transport available, but where it gets to realistically and whether that journey is easy enough to make or if it's a really stressful thing that you have to plan too much and just end up not bother doing because it's just too stressful. And also importantly, ownership and why we can't have more democratic means of ownership and oversight of public transport so that it serves people, not private companies.
Thank you. We had a question as well about keeping it simple. So I'd like each one of us, not me, just to say really simply, like half a minute, how do we keep it simple? At any level you can pick, but how do we keep this a whole environmental conversation agenda simple and actually where we don't ostracize other women because they think they can't be part of this because we're talking about buying expensive clothes which don't have polyester in and therefore cost God knows how much and most people can't afford to buy them, that kind of thing.
I think one way of keeping it simple is reframing the whole narrative around climate change and climate justice so that it's not this really technical, like technocratic thing that only experts with like economics, technology, those kinds of really techie skills that most are highly masculinized. It makes it feel inaccessible when climate change and climate actions framed around carbon taxing or carbon footprints and all of that, and instead focusing it around people's lived experiences and how people experience climate change on the ground and day-to-day things that people are already doing, as we've heard, to try and address climate change.
Thank you. My quick answer is actually you can be an environmentalist no matter what you do and how much resources you've got. And I wish we got told that when we were younger because I used to think it was all about science, something to do with my parents, I'm sure. But actually you can be a feminist and an environmentalist if you're a designer, if you're a teacher, whatever you do, it's in the soul and your actions that you take. But over to you.
I'm keeping it simple. I think it actually, I mean, you could disagree, but it is quite simple, right? We know what we need to do. We need to stop burning fossil fuels. If we've got people who are homeless, give them a home. If we've got people that can't eat, give them nourishing food. Like, we know how to solve these problems. We've known how to solve these problems for a long, long time. We're not doing it. It's not hard. It's not that it's not simple. It's that there's invested interests that are preventing it from happening. And yeah, it is simple, but I don't think it's easy. And I think spaces like this, and I think building spaces where people feel that they belong and that they have ownership of the things that they're working on is just absolutely crucial to fixing not that complicated problem, that simple problem, but that very hard problem in the world that we're currently in.
It's a bit about how we make choices, isn't it? And how our politicians make them. Any thoughts? 1 minute.
So many thoughts. I think I always say when I talk to people, it's how would you want your life to be better? It's as simple as that. It's about making life more valuable, more fun, more enabling us to thrive more. It doesn't have to be about anything else. It shouldn't be about carbon. So I always ask the question, how would you like your life to be better? And normally that is something that is around making climate justice and social justice and racial justice, all those things. And then once you can tell me how you would like your life to be better, tell me how you think you can help your neighbour's life be better, or that person who you see on the bus. And I think it's just as simple as that. It's about enacting all those things.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to add one more. I think I might have said it. It's just don't be preachy to people about the environment all the time, because not everyone can do that. What we can do, especially resource-wise. Emma.
Yeah, keeping it simple is hard, because I think it is so complicated, and it does go into like every area of life. There is nothing that's outside of climate change really, and I think often people, when they ask this, it's like they want like one simple thing that they can do and that solves everything, and there's not really one thing you can give everyone, because a lot of those kinds of solutions are not accessible for different communities. Like, it'd be easy to say stop using plastic, but that's absolutely impossible for many disabled people, or like stop driving so much, again, impossible for some people. So I think it's just about looking at your life and the power that you have, and that everyone has some tiny sphere of influence in some way, and just thinking about how you can be doing what you can in that area. And I think that also it's really important to note that I think, all these issues are connected. Like if you're fighting for social justice or racial justice, then that kind of feeds into the climate change issue as well. So make what you can as you can, where you can.
Thank you. So I'm going to take some more questions, if that's okay. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Oh, I can see. I'll just, trying to be fair here. Right, so as you're on that side, you should keep your hands up, because otherwise people it's difficult to get to you. Keep your hands up. I thought there was.
We've got some questions from the chat here. Do you want me to give one or two?
Why don't you give one from the chat?
One from the chat. So
yeah, and then we'll do the hands up.
So this is a question from Satya. I'm interested about these amazing women here speaking, and who has inspired them.
Okay, that's a good question. Right, I'm going to be polite and go to colleagues. So Emma. Don't know why I keep looking backwards. You're also in front of me. Emma, inspiring women.
Yeah, so many. I guess I already mentioned Greta Thunberg. I think she came to a march in Bristol, and that was the first time I'd ever seen another disabled person on a platform at a climate event. So very inspired by her. Also very inspired by my boss, who the work in Bristol wouldn't have been able to happen by, and been a real force for disability rights and connecting those to climate issues.
Thank you. Dee?
I would say a lot of the women in my family, ancestors, Afro-descendant, indigenous, European women who fought through so many barriers to change things, who did things to shift things politically in their own little way, and mainly in the kitchen.
Yeah. Tiffany?
Yeah, loads. It's hard to pick one, but I think one of the most influential women for me is Audre Lorde, the Black feminist thinker. One of my favorite essays by her is The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action. And there's a really great line in there that goes something like, the machine will grind you to dust whether you speak or not, so speak. And yeah, I think that's really inspiring.
Yeah, that inspires me. Thank you. That's true. Okay.
I'm going to do a very emotional one. My mum, obviously, my mum passed away in February, and she had Alzheimer's, and she was so kind and so loving. And when many layers of her personality was stripped away, God, because of Alzheimer's, at her core was this kindness and this love, and everyone that met her up until the day that she died, she was just full of kindness and love. And I'm an economist, and economics is not full of kindness and love. And we need to build economies that have kindness and love and care meeting people's needs at their core. And I think the reason I believe that so strongly is because that was my mum's core, and she's the most inspirational human being I've ever met.
Thanks for sharing that.
I'm going to do a family one and a non-family one, if that's okay. So I'm going to say, as Dee's alluded to before, and other people, so I'm going to say my granny and my mum. They have gone through a struggle that I will never know, and they will never share fully with me, I don't think, for which I'm both a little bit sad about and a little bit grateful for. So I'm very grateful for the sacrifice they made for me to have a relatively easy life, and the privileges that afforded me to be in front of you. So that is a massive inspiration, and I'm very grateful. And then the other one is a woman called Olive Morris, who was very at the front of the Black Panther movement within the UK. I think the Black Panther movement is often quite Americanized, and there's a different British arm, and she was a young woman. She died very young of leukemia, I believe, but I am just blown away by what she managed to do at a time where it was very difficult to be a young Black woman who was politically active, and she did it all before the age of like 25, where she sadly passed away. So she is an amazing force, and her name's Olive and my name's Olivia, so I feel like we're connected as well.
I'm going to just cheat there. Actually, I'm going to ask everyone to just shout out in a minute, but mine is my mother. She's amazing and always talks about people and planet and looking out for each other, no matter whether you look alike or not. That's just her role. And the other one is my sister, Tayo Adebowale, who is absolutely amazing and has been working on environmental issues since before my time. So do you want to shout out? Doesn't have to be your mum, but anyone just wants to put their hand up? There's a hand up there. Go on, tell us. Tell us. Or get someone else to tell us.
Why do we have land? She's just asked, why do we need land and why do we have it?
Oh, wow. Prime Minister of the future. Wow. Well, do you know what? This is where adults probably disappoint you, because I'm not sure we can answer the question, but it's a good one. Let's see. Can anyone want to answer that question? I mean, we've kind of said it. I think it's because people are sometimes quite selfish and don't do the right thing. But why do people own land? And what was the bit about money? Why do we need land? And why do we want it? And there was a question about money, wasn't there, at the end of that? No, just the land bit. Yeah. Who wants to answer that question? Right.
Well,
okay. I'll come to you, Dee. It's a bit difficult, isn't it? So, do you want to go first?
Dee's got a better answer than me.
Okay, Dee, it's over to you then.
Because our life depends on land. We get our food, our energy, our shelter, everything from the land, our medicine, everything comes from the land, our healing, our water, minerals, and we're so deeply connected, but we've lost that connection. And what we have is a world where people have made these things have a monetary value instead of a social and cultural value. And there are some people who are just greedy. And that's what we're dealing with. When it comes down to it, keeping it simple, there are greedy people in the world who just want more and more and more and extract, and they are destroying our world.
Yeah, and what my kids would say to you, it's because adults don't share. We're not good at sharing, but we tell young people to do that. Okay, another hand over here, and I can see more hands. If you just put them a bit higher, sorry, it's a bit difficult in the right. So I'm going to take 3 questions at a time, so as brief as you can, so everyone gets a chance, if that's possible.
Hiya. My question's about policy, and you mentioned that the Green New Deal in Parliament was falling short. I was wondering, is that the one that's going through as a private member's bill currently? And if so, how is that going to be made better? Like, what needs to be done to make the amendments to that?
Right, I hope someone's writing this down for me. Policy, Green New Deal. Can we move to the person next? I think there's.
Hi, I'd like to hear from any of the panelists about how we build power towards this beautiful, feminist, Green New Deal world where care has been centred and we smash the patriarchy. How do we build this power?
Green New Deal, power, smashing the patriarchy. Okay. So can we come to the front? I think there's two more. Just very briefly, two more, and then we've got 4 questions, which is quite a lot for us already. Go ahead.
For women who live in the global south and in particular areas of extreme poverty, whose primary everyday concerns are keeping themselves and their families alive, and in instances where feminist goals and climate goals don't intersect, how do we justify prioritizing climate goals to them?
Good question. Okay, I think I saw someone else's yes, and then let's try some as well. I think it's a conversation rather than an answer.
Hi, could any of the panelists elaborate just a bit further on why care work is green work?
Okay, shall we start with why care work is green work? And then we'll move on.
Yeah, so I'm sure that all the panelists have a sort of different take on this, but in a very dry, like policy economics-y sense. If we're going to move to a future where we are low carbon and where everybody is able to sustain themselves, and often that is through work, we need to find jobs for people that are low carbon, and lots of people need to do them, right? So that's on the one hand. So care jobs are low carbon in comparison to a lot of other jobs, and they're also labour intensive. So you need lots of people to care for people, because if you have one person caring for 6 people, the care that the 6 people receive is a lot worse than if you have 3 people caring for 6 people. So that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is, if we are talking about a Green New Deal, if we're talking about meeting those 2 pillars of decarbonising and social justice, many of the social justice issues that we have, like education attainment gaps, regional inequality, racial inequality, gender inequality, is because the caring work in society has been so devalued, so underfunded, and so marginalised that people aren't receiving the care that they need, the fundamental basic things that they need to be able to participate fully in society. So care work is green work because it's low carbon, and it's labour intensive, which are economicsy terms. But building the green future that we want, if we're not just going to have everybody in electric cars and Elon Musk on the moon and just everything falling to pieces apart from the rich people, we're going to have an economy that's focusing on care. So that's what I think.
Right. I knew we'd forget. Has anyone else? Right. There was a question actually about, I'm looking at you, there was a question about actually, we're talking about environment, and yet there are women in the South who are going to struggle to have the same kind of conversation that we have, just by the day-to-day living and exhaustion in doing that. So, you know, how are we going to help sisters who have those lives and not be preachy and recognise their knowledge equity, but also their resources, which have, by the way, been limited probably by most of us, whether we liked it or not, through the economies that we have. So who's going to be brave enough to answer that one?
Should I give it a shot?
Yeah, I was going to look to you, but I thought
very
I looked like
scared. No, I think you were particularly asking about when climate agenda doesn't necessarily intersect with these priorities. I would argue that's going to be very rare when that comes up. I think maybe it's because of the world I live in, but I think I would argue that is going to be the case in most aspects. And I also think your question was around how do we justify those priorities to these communities. I think there's a lot for making things locally relevant. I think that's a big part of it. And I also think sometimes, how do I say this? Sometimes there's going to be there's a lot of different agendas happening at the same time, and not everyone has to be on board with all of them, but there has to be equal space given to everything. I think that's does that make sense, what I'm trying to say? It's at the moment we've got one agenda who dominates all the others. It's not to say that that agenda is not valued. I would argue it isn't, but it's the fact that it dominates all others. So as long as your agenda isn't in domination of that, there's an aspect of it, things can be balanced. So I would argue that I think potentially you have to question, why would you want to justify an agenda to someone that isn't going to do them good? I think that comes back to a bit of the question. Does that make sense as an answer?
Sorry, I'm doing it again. I'm looking to the person that asked the question to see if that answer worked for you, and maybe just half a minute on what your thinking is, because I imagine in answering the question you've got an idea about the answer.
Well, so I live in South Africa, and in South Africa we work with a lot of charities because we have a lot of poverty and a lot of disparity, and resources are very limited, and climate change is not at all a priority in South Africa, because our main focus is helping people, getting people food, getting people healthcare and medicine. And yeah, it's difficult to explain to these people why they should support climate change initiatives, vote people in who support climate change initiatives instead of people who are focused on more feminist racial justice.
Okay.
But it was a great answer.
But I think there's an aspect of, so it's the politicians' job to make themselves relevant to all those sectors that you highlighted, because all of those things, healthcare, food, they're all issues of climate change. So it's a matter of those who have the power and the resource and the time to give to work to communicate better, doing that for those communities when it's around voting those things in. And I also think, as I said before, it's about how can your life be better, and it can be hard. We were talking about dotted lines, connecting the dots between things, and it's sometimes hard to do that. But I would argue, and it's not necessarily a helpful argument, that it's not the job of the under-resourced to draw those lines and make those connections. It's the job of those with the privilege and the power and the time to do that, to help that be seen, because they need majority support to get into office. So why wouldn't they want to?
Yeah. Thank you. I guess it's also about not having the same expectations of people that have got the money and the resources and the power to do. It's not the same thing when you're struggling every day just trying to feed your family. And I'll add to that, and it's not necessarily to do with your question, but actually I've never spoken to someone beyond 10 minutes where they didn't actually do understand the environment and why it's important. It's just about having that conversation with them about how they speak about it. Because if you talk to someone, do you want to live on a planet that's healthy? I don't know one person that said no to me, and that's normally how I start the conversation. If I think they're just trying to kind of have a conversation about environment. I think it's because sometimes we wrap it around in our own language, don't we, and make it far too clever or stupid actually for the people who don't get it. Okay, enough about me. Any more questions? Yes, sorry.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that one of the principles of a feminist Green New Deal is global justice, and that means recognizing that these north-south inequalities exist because of decisions that governments and particularly powerful governments in the quote-unquote global north have made. And to bring it back to transport, electrification has been, praised as kind of how we're going to decarbonize transport. So electric cars are really not part of the solution, because when you think about where the batteries are made, it will just perpetuate extractive industries in the global south. And we're keeping in mind that principle of global justice, it's very clear that prioritizing electric cars for European, North American, and other wealthy industrialized nations will just perpetuate global inequalities.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Did we have one around power and smashing the patriarchy?
Did we have one about power? We did. How could I forget that one? Right. Should we ask that question? Was it answered? I don't think it was it? Who wants to take that one on? I'm not going to do it because I've got too much to say about that one. So
I've got a quick
do you want to have a
answer.
go? And I might just say 1 minute to everyone. 'cause
Obviously,
everyone's got an
it's
idea.
going to take all sorts, but the work that I do, so I work for an organisation called the Social Guarantee, and we work on basically this idea that everybody has fundamental needs that they need meeting to participate in society, and the role of the economy should be meeting those needs, and that needs to be done through collective action. So, like Tiffany was saying, yes, government went and did all of these things, but also private companies went and did all of these things, right? The outsourcing and privatization of our land, of our transport systems, of all of the sort of systems that we depend on to live has destroyed them. And privatization is very masculinized in these big bosses, in these big companies. And the stuff that's worth money is not the caring labour, is not traditionally the work of women, the feminized labour. And I think that a really important step in creating the world that we want to see is building back our public services, reversing the enclosures of our, not just our public spaces, but our public services and the systems that we depend on. And that takes collective action. And yeah, we're not going to get what we want without rolling back privatization, rebuilding the unions, creating spaces like this, creating cultural spaces for people to join together, creating political spaces for people to join together. I think that's such a huge part of it. And yeah.
Okay, thank you. Great. Right, if there's no other answers, Emma, do you want to say anything, or shall we move on to the next question? I'm looking for time because I think actually the fact that we're all trying to change the world, you can't do it in like the next 5 minutes, can we? What do I need to say then? I think it's more of this, please, Women's Environmental Network, more conversations. But also, I think as we're moving on, we're also looking at sort of what comes next, isn't it? And what's immediate. But is there anything else that we want to say before we end? Do you want to just come up? No. You don't? Okay. So I think we're going to wrap up unless I'm told otherwise. I would like to thank the Women's Environmental Network. I think it's been absolutely amazing. But I'm getting that, so that means we've got the performance to go. So I can't talk anymore, which is quite right. And can we do the performance with another example of culture illustrating the environment? Okay, can we go? I mean, can we start? Okay. Well, what do you say to that amazing performance? Wow. I haven't danced in a while, you know, and that just shows. But it just shows how brilliant that was, because it got me up and I kind of forgot that I was a bit embarrassed about dancing. Wow. I think the first thing to say is we're all here because of the Women's Environmental Network. And they are an amazing group of women and individuals that support our work and talk about environment for decades, about the role of women in environment. People weren't listening and it was not particularly fashionable. And I think they do an amazing job, but I also think all of you do. And that's why WEN has opened the space for everyone to have that conversation as environmentalists. Our work is not yet done for WEN or for any of us. But I think we're going to stay strong because we've just danced around the room together and we don't know each other. So I reckon that means we're okay for trying to solve climate change. I will say, because I think they're too embarrassed to say it, but as someone that runs a charity, I know it's really important to say, they do amazing work and they are a charity. Now, if you can help in any way, whether that's your time, whether that's your support, whether it's about talking about how amazing they are, or whether you can fund something, and really it's a whole heap of things you can do to support any community, any charity like Wen who do amazing work. So just tell people about them. Let's work together again. I hope I see you in another time and another life, and I hope in that other life we all have. We've solved it and we're still dancing, yeah? Okay, thank you very much. Try and get one of my colleagues up on Wen, but I think she's a bit too embarrassed. Oh, please, come on.
Hello, everybody. I'd just like to thank you all for coming, and also to thank our partners in this project, the Women's Budget Group, because it has been a truly collaborative project. So, yeah, can we give a round of applause to Women's Budget Group too? But really, I'd like to just say the thanks to all of you for being here. We really appreciate it. We haven't had live events for a long time, and we're really happy to be back. So hope you'll join us for future events. And yeah, thank you so much for being here with us. And a huge thank you to Maria, our wonderful chair. It was a very complicated agenda, and she did brilliantly keep it all together.
Thank you.
Thank you, and keep dancing.
Yeah. Safe journey home.